Good afternoon. This is the Devar Torah on Parashat Noach, the second portion of Bereshis. And to summarize it very, very briefly, because to do a full summary could take quite a long time. It starts with Noach, God telling him he's got to prepare an ark so that because the end of the world is coming, the world will become so evil that everything had to literally be washed away. Humans, animals, plants, and even a certain amount of soil, because everything had become so ritually and spiritually impure. It then describes the marvel of the flood. From there, it goes to the incident of Noah with his three sons. And from there, it goes to 10 generations. Now, although people didn't have as long a lifespan as they did before, they still had a pretty long lifespan. And they could have done all kinds of things and gotten closer to Hashem. They should have learned from the marvel. What happens again? They decline to the point of worshiping idols, and the Tower of Babel, where they're trying to build a tower to heaven to do battle with God. And it ends with information about Abraham, but then as he was Abram, Sarai and his family, and their family. And I'd like to focus on a few questions here. Very interesting. Before the marble, before the flood, people lived extremely long lives. They were, except for the last generation before the flood, they lived in the 700s of years, 800s, even 900s in some cases. Not just the ones mentioned. That was the lifespan generally. Now, at the end of Parshas Bereshis, which leads into this Parsha, he says, I know the nature of man, God, and I'm going to limit their lives to 120 years. And today, we don't even quite make it to there. The average lifespan seems to be 70, 80 years, even under ideal conditions, though I understand there's people living beyond that. And so the question is, why did life spans go down? That's one question. The second question I want to deal with, besides the lifespans, is lifespans were shortened because basically the world got so corrupt that Hashem had to wipe out the entire population. What would have happened if that generation had done tshuva, if that generation had repented? How would the world have been different? And the third question I want to deal with is what kind of implications does this have for us? And what I'm going to go into in recent history, the last few hundred years, I'm also going to be discussing something that follows from this whole story of the flood, and we'll continue into the future parshas. In any event, it is explained by the Orach Chaim HaKodesh that this whole question of lifespan. Now, Adam had 930, as I said, as he points out, 800 or 700 years. Now, I understand the oldest living person right now is 114 years old. Now, what one has to understand that one soul are consists of numerous sparks. Most neshimas come into souls come in numerous sparks, and those sparks, when a person has used all of those or has fulfilled all of those, that's when it's time for them to go to the next world. In fact, every night they say in the Gemara that we're 1/60th, people are 1/60th dead while they're asleep. What it means is the neshama goes up, the sparks go up to heaven of the soul. Now, not completely, they're still attached to the person's body. However, when that individual spark has completed its function, it doesn't come back the next day. It doesn't mean the person dies or anything, but that part of them or has fulfilled it. Now, the Or Chaim gives a very interesting comparison. He says that he compares it to a king who distributes precious stones, like jewels, that came in their raw state. In other words, they haven't been refined at all. He gives them the craftsmen to refine them so that, the jewelry will have its ultimate beauty, and to make gold settings for them. Now, he said, this king, a decree that any person will be diligent and exert himself in this would get an incredible reward. Now, the king gave a very large number of stones to each one of these jewelers, somewhere between 300,000, somebody else 350,000, an enormous number, and he gave them a lot of time to take care of it. And those who did the work were going to get greatly rewarded. Where does he come in? He gathers them in after the allotted time, and guess what? They wrecked the stones. Instead of beautifying them, they damaged them, and they soiled them, and they messed up the gold too. So king became very angry at his servants. What did he do? Next generation of skilled craftsmen, he gives them less to do. He gives them only 30 to 40,000 stones. And when he gives them 30 to 40,000 stones, he expects they're going to do what needs to be done, right? And what is he comparing that to? He's comparing that to the people so then he has to modify his next subsequent generations, modify it even more. And what are these precious stones? The Or Chaim explains what that's talking about is the souls of the people. They're viewed as valuable stones. Right? Now, what's the tools and preparations that he gives for them? Torah and mitzvahs. And he gave us a very high level of soul. So what do we do? First 10 generations were assigned enormous tasks. As I said, it came down to the day of the marble, right? In fact, it says he allotted one day to work on each part of his soul. And what does that mean? Shmos 16:4. Every day has its portion. That means every spark of the neshama. Now, he gave him 300,000 parts. And how long did that take? 930 years to complete them. And he gave other similar, more or less numbers. What did they do? They became corrupted, and they had to be destroyed. So what did he do in subsequent generations? He gave them less jewels to work on, and so therefore they needed a lesser lifespan. To the time when we get now to maximum 120, usual average 70 or 80, we're given much fewer things to do. Now, that's what happened. So this is why after the Mabul, even they had lesser lifespans, but still more. Only after the time of the Avot did we get down to normal lifespan. Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov and their wives. Only did we get to the type of lifespans we have now. Now, we saw what happened. Now, what would have happened if that generation had repented? And if that generation had repented, we would have seen something very interesting occurring. Because it says, Shana Shesh Meod Shana L'Chaim Noach, in the 600th year of Noach's life, Nikvu Kol HaMayanot and Chatum Rabba V'Arbaim Shemayim Nifko. In the 600 years of life of Noah, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Now, what this seems to be talking about is the marble, because not only was it raining from above, which would be the gates, which would be the windows of the heavens, it also talked the deep fountains of the deep burst forth, because boiling hot water came out. Only by a miracle did the fish and other sea creatures survive, only by divine intervention. And that's not what was supposed to have happened originally. If they had done, as the Zohar explains, if they had done tshuva, what would have happened? The window of heavens refer to the written Torah, the Torah Shabbat, and the fountains of deep, the oral Torah. So in other words, there would have been the Torah would have been given at the time of Noach. Noach would have led the generation, and a lot of the history that occurred later would have been totally different, radically different. Now, therefore, but that didn't occur. But let's look at the time. In the year, from the years, let's fast forward to the sixth millennium, 6,000 years, which we are now in. And at that time, what would have happened? And to give you some, make it easier, that would be from the years in secular calendar, 1739 to 1839. Now, you'll also notice at that point, there's a parallel development. What is the parallel development? The parallel development is that was a time when technology started developing, things were moving from cottage industry to factories, new inventions were coming out, such as steam power, aspects of electricity. Eventually, in that time period, there was the precursors of what later became the telephones. We already had the telegraph by then. And this was a time of testing, just like the generation of Noah, even though it's a shorter generation. In those 100 years, there was an unparalleled flowering of Torah, both in the Sephardi world, Mizrahi world, and the Zohar explains even in the and in East Europe, Western Europe, the Vilna Gaon, many Sephardi masters, Rav Chaim Volozhin, the Baal Shem Tov, the blossoming of the Torah of the Hasidim. And if we had fulfilled our potential at that time, the whole history of the last close to 200 years would have been different. Because what was being at stake, if we had done what we were supposed to, all the technology would have been in the control of the hands of the Jewish people. And not the mass production, not to the industrialists such as Henry Ford and many others. It would have been in our hands. But the fact that it wasn't in our hands, it changed the whole course of history, because who took over whose hands did it fall into? The major European and Asian powers in America, and it was used for evil. We saw a number of wars, the most dramatic of which were World War I and World War II, and it was only because of the technology of the early computers and of the mass production methods and modern rail lines was the show were able to happen at all. Because it was with the punch card system, they were able to keep track of the 6 or 7 million people they killed. And Germans were meticulous at records. It's led then to Israel coming to existence under very difficult circumstances. Modern technologies be used for war. in the nuclear weapons, the non-nuclear weapons. We're seeing them displayed all over the world in such diverse places, the Ukraine and the Middle East. And now, just now, we are starting to come into the era when it's going to be switching from them to coming into the hands of Bnei Israel. We already see technological advances in Israel that Hashem has allowed to happen, that has created the miracles of us avoiding attacks by various enemies. And we are coming to the end of days as we understand it, because as explained, this is the sixth millennium, from the year 5000 to 6000. This is the time in which Mashiach must come, B'tikiyat Metim, the resurrection of the dead, and many other wonders before the world as we know it is going to end by the years around 6000, in which case we're going to get into a much more spiritually elevated situation, which I'll discuss in the Devar Torah some other time. In any event, may we see the damage that has happened over the last 200 years be fixed. We're already seeing the early steps of it. And may we merit having the gates, the end, the redemption, Mashiach, and all that this year. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.